Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's episode of Paranormal Encyclopedia. As always, I'm your host, Kevin Mears, demonologist in the Paranormal Encyclopedia, and I'm really excited to be going to actually be back in a rhythm again and doing weekly episodes. So, I'm continuing this monsters trend that we've had the last few weeks. We did vampires, we did werewolves. I was thinking about doing Frankenstein's monster, but I'm actually currently doing some research on that. Reading Raymond McNally's book In Search of Frankenstein about the origins of where Shelley got her idea. It's really interesting, but we'll be getting into that in probably a future episode. And hi, Teresa Hall City Pagan, or Gulf City Pagan, excuse me. Thank you for joining us. So instead, I decided I'm going to talk about zombies in general, and more particularly the religion of voodoo or voodoo. Um, Partly because I find them really fascinating, and partly because I find intensely irritating what pop culture has done to both of them. They are vastly more fascinating and more complex than the average horror movie, or for that matter, um, yeah, pretty much the average horror movie makes them out to be. In both cases, just different genres of horror movie. Before I do that, I want to remind everybody again that coming up next month, just under a month, in fact, we're going to be having a virtual convention right here on YouTube, although not this channel. We're creating a special channel just for it called Wrath of Khan, the Corona Apocalypse. This is the culmination of an idea I've had for literally decades now. Oh yeah, I first started thinking about this around 2000, so not probably around 19 years. It's very exciting. We're going to have one of our frequent listeners, Lisa for Truth, is joining us. Dacre Stoker, John French, Patrick Thomas. We've got some new people we're in the discussions with, trying to bring them on, musicians, things of that nature. It should be extremely exciting. And remember, it's going to be it's going to be on YouTube. It's going to be completely free. We are strongly encouraging people to donate to charity. Instead of even more so than giving us money. I mean, you're welcome. You're always welcome to give me money. I won't complain about that. But a lot of this is very specifically going to be aimed at raising money for Corona relief, or probably at this point, Corona relief. Um, I almost forgot. Our good friend Virgo Triad is actually going to be the second person up. The first person is going to be me. I'm going to be going from 1 o'clock till 2 on, well, probably 1:45 more like, on the 16th, and then Virgo will be taking over to give her own presentation, and we'll be going from there. The rest of the schedule I'm still working on. I should have it up soon, I hope. But if you're a presenter, if you have a YouTube channel, if you're some kind of performer, please reach out. You can find us on Facebook, either at the Paranormal Encyclopedia page or at the Wrath of Khan page, because the convention has its own page. But that's enough of that for now, because you'll be hearing more and more about it until the big weekend. It does definitely look like we're actually going to be having speakers and performers both the 16th and 17th. There's just too many awesome people to confine it all to one day, and pretty much everybody wants an hour or more. Um, but okay, that's enough of that. So the first to understand zombies, you really need to start by understanding voodoo, and a lot of people don't really don't, which is unfortunate. People, I look a lot. I tend to hang around on Quora a lot and answer questions, and it always bugs me when I see people asking questions about voodoo because they don't understand what it actually is. People think when I say voodoo, people tend to think of zombies. They tend to think of voodoo dolls. They think of curses and black magic and demons and all sorts of other horrible things. And none of that is accurate. Um, no, I don't know of that particular individual, Teresa. I'll have to check her out. Um, Makes me think of Marie Laveau, who we'll be getting into. But, oh, hey, Lisa for Truth, welcome aboard, as always. So, the first thing I want to make clear is that voodoo is a religion. It is not, it often includes the practice of various magical spells and rituals, but the two are not, well, the two are related, they're not mutually dependent. You can practice voodoo and not do the spells, You can do the spells and not actually practice voodoo. There are even Catholics who do spell. Well, okay. In fact, that's the thing. Clarify. So there's voodoo and hoodoo. Voodoo is the religion. Hoodoo is the spells and curses and all of those other things everybody mistakenly thinks of as voodoo. Um, voodoo that's with a U, not an I. But I use the more common voodoo spelling because it's what people recognize, and I wanted it to be easier to find in search engines. Um, but so again, hoodoo is magic, voodoo is a religion. The two relate to each other, but they're not dependent on each other. Um, and here's the thing: voodoo is what we call a syncretic religion. People talk often about how Christianity borrowed these elements from paganism. For example, the Christmas tree is very much drawn from pagan roots. Santa Claus has pagan roots. The candy canes, mistletoe, a lot of the other things associated with Christmas, pretty much everything associated with Halloween, all are drawn from older pagan traditions. Um, but that's absolutely true. Christianity is hardly the only religion to do it, and a really good example of this is a collection of religions that we know as Afro Carribean religions. Um, these religions, and there's several interrelated ones: Santeria, Pale Mayumbe, Macumba, um, and Voodoo, all fall under this umbrella. They're products of the African slave trade in the 18th and 19th centuries. That's why, for example, it's so prominent in Haiti, because slavers would bring the slaves to Haiti, they'd bring them to the New World, um, and they'd bring their practices with them. The two things you would find is that because the slave traders and the slave owners weren't very picky about keeping families together, let alone tribal groups, people from different tribes, different part of Africa, would be thrust together, and their gods would intermix. Um, people, historians tend to think of, well, voodoo comes from the Congo regions, Dahomey, where the Santeria comes from more West Africa, and it's really not quite that simple. The lines aren't that clear. But the thing that you run into is voodoo is very much a combination of three major things: um, animism, um, ancestor worship, and Christianity, particularly Catholicism. Animism is probably the oldest form of religion humans practice. It's the worship of spirits. More specifically, it's this notion that we've all probably heard of at some point in our lives, that everything has a soul, everything has a spirit, rocks, trees, things like that. And a lot of the gods of voodoo are embodying. Well, and that's another thing. They're not actually gods. I'll get there in a second. A lot of the beings that are honored and worshipped in voodoo are associated with natural forces. You know, as rule, one of the very important ones is associated with the river, with the rainbow. The Damballa, probably one of the most famous, is associated with is the serpent. Um, Ogun is associated with destruction. They're primal forces. On the other hand, they also tend to worship important figures in their history. It could be a tribal chief, it could be a great warrior, it could be an important religious figure. A very common example of this that we'll be getting to later is the widow, a woman known variously as both the Widow of Paris and more famously as Marie Laveau, the Voodoo Queen of New Orleans. Um, to this day, her what's thought to be her grave in St. Louis Cemetery #1 is frequently visited by practitioners of voodoo. Um, and they leave her gifts. Yeah, Agun is an interesting figure. A lot of the Loa are very interesting and complex figures, and again, there's a progression. I want to get to the history, and then I'll get into some of the beliefs and practices. But Laveau certainly has become venerated as one of the Loa. And then the last part is it's become twined with Christianity. A lot of the Loa, the spirits that are worshipped in Voodoo, are associated with the saints of Roman Catholicism. Even the religion of Santeria is the name Santeria means the worship of the saints. Um, why this is, I've always heard growing in most of my research, what it came down to is that as voodoo was brought to the New World, as African practices were brought to the New World, they were faced with the conflict of the white slave owners finding their religion disturbing, both because it wasn't Christianity and because it is a more robust form of worship. Drums, dancing, and ritualized symbolism and animal sacrifice. And yes, animal sacrifice is very much a part of these religions. Getting to get into that too. Um, and that they adopted the aspects of Catholicism, which was very prominent, particularly in New Orleans, as a defense mechanism, so that they could practice their religion by going to Sunday Mass. Marie Laveau herself considered herself a practicing Catholic. Voodoo ceremonies heavily involve Catholic ceremonies. I've even heard a voodoo funeral requires a Catholic Mass to be said. Um, but and that's what basically happened, is that whether it was that or whether something else, voodoo mixed with Christianity, and the two have become and in the South, in parts of the South, the two have been almost inseparable. Um, there are churches in Louisiana and other places in the South where if you go to where they keep the statues of the saints, you'll find little bags of offerings left by voodoo practitioners. And the church has become so aware of the realities of this that priests in those areas are given training on how to just treat them with respect instead of throwing them away or trashing or otherwise destroying them, because it's part of that person's religion. And some of these people have integrated the two to the point that they consider themselves practicing Catholics. Like I said, so actually, it's worth talking about Marie Laveau at this point. So it's hard to talk about the history, particularly of New Orleans voodoo, without talking about Marie Laveau. She didn't invent it. Voodoo is one of the oldest religious practices in the world. Its roots are in tribal beliefs in Africa, going back thousands of years. She's the one who popularized it. She was a hairdresser. She was actually a free woman. She wasn't a slave, but she was a hairdresser who was very popular with the high class society in New Orleans, who built a name for herself as a voodoo practitioner. Specifically, she billed herself as the Voodoo Queen of New Orleans, a title that many have used since. And she was very much a publicity figure, a figure that relied a lot on publicity. She was very smart and very clever because she took advantage of the fact that she was a hairdresser. And no disrespect to my female audience, but some stereotypes exist for a reason. Women in hair salons in the 19th century, much like in particularly high class ones, much like today, like to gossip. So when you have a bunch of rich and powerful women sitting around while you cut their hair, gossiping with the other women who are waiting, and things of that nature, you pick things up. And she certainly wasn't above using blackmail to further her purposes. You'll hear, for example, about how she's the one who started doing voodoo ceremonies in St. John's Square, which is a pretty major place in the center of New Orleans. She invited people. She brought in the general public. She turned it into a tourist attraction. I think she, in large part, probably hardly the only thing. She's probably a large part of why voodoo is so intertwined with New Orleans, and why there are voodoo tours and museums and other very public things in New Orleans that everybody knows about. There are other voodoo churches around the country. There's one in Philadelphia, which is much further north than New Orleans, obviously. But there's nowhere in the United States, at least, where voodoo is as public as it is. The thing to understand, I think, from a historian's and a sociological and anthropological perspective, voodoo gave people that often were powerless at the time, because we're talking about a lot of people who were slaves, a sense of power. You'll find, for example, that the Haitian slave revolt in the 19th century, the leaders of it were, I'm forgetting the name for them, Hongans, which is a priests in Voodoo, or Mamaloas. Supposedly, even some of the soldiers were zombies. Pabadak Dubolier, the infamous Haitian dictator, practiced voodoo, and his Tonton Macoute, his secret police, supposedly included Bokors, which are black magicians in voodoo, and again, zombies. Um, the history of Haiti is very much tied to voodoo. And there's an infamous thing that preacher and journal nutcase Pat Robertson said about Haiti, that they had they had made a deal with the devil. That's not actually true. Although it's true from his perspective. Because, of course, to Pat Robertson, anyone who wasn't worshiping his God was worshiping the devil. And they did, and on the night of the eve of the slave revolt, they did perform a ritual dedicating the revolt to their gods. So Haiti, from its beginning, has had a dedication to the gods of this religion. Then I'm not passing let me be very clear. I am not passing a value judgment here. I am not saying that they worship the devil. It's just a question of history. Even if you don't believe in voodoo, in the magical power of voodoo, I should say. I mean, not believing in voodoo is absurd. It's like saying I don't believe in Christianity. It's a religion. There are people that practice voodoo. Doesn't mean you have to believe that it has any magical power, but certainly to say that a religion that has hundreds, if not thousands, of practitioners in the U.S. alone doesn't exist is ridiculous. Yes, Teresa, I'm familiar with Pat's wacky belief. I actually wrote an article about it at the time, and then got flack about it for calling him out on being wrong. But and that's actually this also leads the confusion of Voodoo Loa with Satan is a common recurring theme. One of the most famous stories in folklore that we've discussed before, of course, is the story of Robert Johnson, the blues musician who sold his soul to the devil at the crossroads to become the greatest guitarist and blues musician who ever lived. There's a school of thought in folklore, and whether or not it's true of Johnson, certainly Johnson hyped up the idea that it was Satan himself in his own music and comments. But there is a school of thought that what actually happened is he made a deal with one of the Loa, one known as Papa Legba. Legba is a trickster deity and a god of the crossroads. Crossroads traditionally being seen as kind of a crossing point between worlds. And he's known in voodoo folklore for making deals with people. Even if the Johnson legend isn't about Legba, there are certainly other very similar stories that fit that motif. And Legba's a trickster. He's not evil, but he's not necessarily the sort of being you want to make a deal with. Good taste, Teresa. Johnson is an amazing bluesman. And there's a ton of other ways that voodoo and its Loa influence American culture. There's another good example, which is from one of the most famous TV shows of all time, I Love Lucy. But there's a famous scene that happened in the show, at least once, maybe more than once, where Ricky Ricardo does a drum beat and talking about Babalui or Babalui. But the point being, that's a god in Santeria. Well, a spirit in Santeria. I'm gonna get into this in a second. It was, and the actor himself, if memory serves, was in fact a practitioner. It was in honor of one of these deities, and so here's the thing, and why I keep getting blurry with spirit and deity. Voodoo and most of its related religions despite what it sounds like, more or less monotheistic. Um, they believe there's one God, but their God is a deistic God. For those of you who don't know, deism is the belief that God set the universe in motion and took a nap, or went on vacation, or just is sitting back with a big bowl of popcorn and watching the show. It's the idea that yes, God got the universe started, but God doesn't get involved in. He doesn't. Miracles don't happen. He doesn't get involved in the day-to-day running of his universe. He lets the forces of nature that he set up do all the work. He's dead. He's sleeping. He's off creating another universe. He's simply observing something's happening, and he's not involved in the day-to-day running of the universe. Where voodoo and its related religions differ from mainstream deism is so the creator god not involved. He's checked out. But he has a series of spirits. The Loa, the Orishas in Santeria, various other names. These spirits will, in return for homage and sacrifice, do things for for mortals. It's them that homage and worship is given to. It's them that animals are sacrificed to. And we're gonna get to that too, because that's actually an interesting thing. And I think a lot of people misunderstand. Yes, voodoo and its related religions involved the sacrifice of living animals to their gods. In most of the practices, the animal's throat slit, the blood is drained out, the blood is left as an offering to the gods. And then you want to know what happens to the rest of the animal? They eat it. People tend to think this is barbaric. It really isn't. Because here's the thing that you have to keep in mind. It's less true, although there's some truth of it here, but especially in some of the more rural parts of Africa, this is very true. But the reality is, these animals are not being killed just for religious purposes. They're not being tortured. In fact, in voodoo and the related religions, it is considered a grave insult to the spirits that you're making the sacrifice to for the animal to suffer. You have to kill it quickly, you have to kill it painlessly. And then there's some prayer rituals and things like that go around it. Another important thing to realize here is that human sacrifice almost never happens. I'm not going to say it never ever happens, but it is not part of normal Afro Carribean religious practice. Okay? The biggest animal most voodoo cults will ever sacrifice is a cow in some parts of Africa. And here, before you judge them for killing animals, because there are animal rights activists that will be horrified about this in general. A lot of other people just are horrified of this idea of killing animals for religion. Keep in mind a couple of facts. First, in a lot of parts of the world, an animal sacrifice is the sole source of protein those people are getting. In parts of Africa and in the Congo, there's a big ritual once a year. They kill a cow in honor of the gods, and then everybody has a giant feast. In the United States, you kill a chicken, you eat the chicken. It's not; these animals are not being killed just for religious or magical purposes. They're not being unnecessarily tortured. If you do not approve of meat eating in general, I can understand that, particularly in the U.S., where other sources of protein are more readily available. But try to put it in a cultural perspective and realize it isn't as horrible as movies make it out to be. There are splinter groups, and more often than groups, individuals within the religion that do torture animals and commit human sacrifice, but those are seen as the same way that devil worshippers are seen by Christians. It's seen as inappropriate. It's seen as immoral and wrong. It is not acceptable to mainstream voodoo practice, nor would it ever be. The other thing I would offer as food for thought, and why people should be, two things to offer as food for thought. One, animal sacrifice is completely legal in the United States. This has gone all the way up to the Supreme Court. Um, the Church of Lukumi Babaluai versus the city of Hialeah. The Supreme Court of the U.S. ruled that it was unconstitutional because a local Florida city had banned Santeria ritual sacrifice of animals. So yes, it's legal. It has been decided at the Supreme Court level that this is legal. And it is not a criminal offense. Where a lot of practitioners get in trouble these days is zoning regulations. Because for sanitary reasons and for other reasons, there are places you're not supposed to kill. Animals are to be killed in a slaughterhouse or by a butcher. You don't necessarily kill them in somebody's residence or in a church, and that can be a whole other legal issue. But the idea of sacrificing animals itself is federally protected and seen as part of the First Amendment, and I think it should be, for the record. Because here's the other thing: they're not the only ones who do it. I mean no disrespect with the connection I'm about to make. But you can go to your grocery store right now. Please wait till the show's over and please wait to wear a mask. Go find the hot dogs, and you can probably find an animal that, depending on your perspective, was killed through ritual sacrifice. Hebrew national hot dogs, or for that matter, kosher meat in general. In Jewish law, there are specific prayers and rituals that are supposed to be said over an animal that's to be killed. The animal is to be killed quickly and painlessly. And these days, as I understand, they usually use a bolt gun. They fire a bolt into the base of the skull and kill it nearly instantly. And the blood is drained out. That's not that. Again, I mean, no disrespect to Jews when I point this out, but that is not that different than what Voodoo and similar religions do when they commit animal sacrifice. It's a ritual way of essentially it's a ritual way of preparing food. That this is why I am entirely on the side of the Supreme Court in saying that it should remain legal. There's a bookcase behind me, believe it or not. Chicano Azteca? I like your name, by the way. No, Chicano Azteca said, "The view I have of you is like something you'd see before a zombie sneaks up behind you and bites your neck in half." But yeah, there's a bookcase back here and windows. But I still kind of like the image, as morbid as that might be. But that's the thing I wanted to say about animal sacrifice. It's very easy for Westerners in particular to look down our noses at other people's religious practices. And there's certainly very odd parts of voodoo. There's one more thing I'm going to get into before I get into zombies themselves. But it's easy to look down our nose at religion as evil, cult-like, inferior. But they're the practitioners are mostly like everybody else. The religion has its weirdos and its wackos and its psychos, like every other religion does. It's not inherently evil. And, you know, what I find particularly interesting about it is voodoo's very unlike any major religion I know of in one particular respect. Because in Christianity and Judaism and Buddhism, Hinduism, you have a relationship with your God, but it's kind of a one-sided affair. You pray to your God, and you may believe that they speak to you. I'm not. You may feel that they give you answers in some sense, but generally speaking, you don't expect your God to show up and and ask for a bottle of rum or a pack of smokes. In voodoo, their Loa do exactly that, and I'm not being figurative at all. Because there's a practice in voodoo that's called being ridden. Being ridden means that during a voodoo ritual, practitioners invite the Loa to enter their body and take control in a form of voluntary possession. This doesn't seem like demonic, although they do have ideas of demonic possession and a negative thing as well. But generally speaking, being possessed by one of the Loa is not an evil thing. It's something you want. It's something you desire. It's something you pray for, because it gives you and the other practitioners direct communication with the divine. You're not praying to a god and believing he listens. The god's talking to you and probably asking you for rum and tobacco, because those are aside from animal sacrifices, and they will also ask for that while riding people. Some of the most common things that the Loa will ask for are rum and tobacco. Um, and it's interesting because you'll go to Haiti and see Hongans and Mamaloas invoke specific Loa, and when a person's being ridden by them, they always behave in specific ways. Like they may act like an old man, curled over. Then you can go to Haiti, see a different Hongan, different Mamaloa, who's never been to Haiti, call on the same Loa, and you get the same sort of mannerism, the same kind of reactions, the same requests for offerings. It's actually quite fascinating, in my opinion. And there's been a whole bunch of psychological studies on it, and the trans states involved tend to be similar to other religious trans states. But it is, in my opinion, a very fascinating thing that they very much expect. It's not unreasonable if you're a practitioner of these religions to expect your God to come for a visit, or the being you're honoring at least, to come for a visit and talk to you and interact with you and make requests of you and help you in turn. Um, and there are a lot of fun though, and I'll say just a few. One of the other ones I didn't mention yet that I've always found fascinating. There's Baron Samedi, who's known by a couple of other names. He's the god of He's the god of black magic. He's the god of death. He's the god of ghosts. He's the god or Loa, all the above. Excuse me. But he's not like the Grim Reaper at all. He's not like Satan. He's not even like Hades. He shows up. He wants to party. He wants his rum. He wants his smokes. He's generally seen as a fun-loving, very upbeat kind of Loa. Although he dressed, and here's another fun one for anyone in the audience who's a fan of Disney. If you want to know what the Baron is supposed to look like, watch the movie The Princess and the Frog. Well, his colors are darker. Or Samini's colors are darker. He tends to dress more like the blacks of a classic Undertaker. The image of Dr. Fassier in the movie The Princess and the Frog is the image of Baron Samedi. That's what he's supposed to look like. They did a decent amount of research on voodoo for that movie. They were very careful, particularly in his case. Other than involving the image of Samedi, they tried very hard to avoid any direct um, references to the religion, partly out of respect for the fact that there are people that practice religion, and for other reasons as well. Um, but in general, I very much like you have Fassier, who's seen as this trickster, shyster con man who's into the dark arts. But what's the name of the white magic voodoo practitioner in Britain?
I don't remember.
But there's the old woman who's also practicing voodoo, who is not evil, who's helpful, who sets people on their, the heroes on their path. And I can't remember her name. My fiance can't remember her name. But it shows that the religion isn't just evil and dark and sinister. But this does bring us to the other part of tonight's topic, which is the zombie. Let's clear something up to begin with. When George Romero first wrote Night of the Living Dead,
Mama Odie.
Mama Odie was the woman's name. Thank you, honey. But when he first wrote Night of the Living Dead, he didn't call the creatures in the movie zombies. He called them ghouls. Ghouls is a little complicated as well. It's basically a form of genie, believe it or not. That's so. I need to do more research before I can do it, but I think genie is a whole jinn, to be more accurate, are a whole other topic worth covering. The ghouls are a type of ghoul, GH. They're a type of jinn that they tend to live in graveyards. They eat the flesh of the dead and things of that nature. They're very dark, very sinister. Where jinn in general are not necessarily evil, ghouls generally are dark, are not nice creatures. But if you look at Romero's inspirations and sources, a big inspiration for him was the novel, and some of the earlier movie adaptations of I Am Legend. In I Am Legend, the creatures are very similar to Romero's zombies in a lot of ways, except they're more modeled off of vampires. And very much Romero's zombies in a lot of ways, more closely resemble dumb vampires than folkloric zombies. So let's talk about actual zombies. In particular, so in voodoo, a zombie is a person who is killed and then raised through magical means. Their soul is stolen by a bokor, a practitioner of black magic. And the person is forced to work for them. This is something people in Haiti, in particular, very much still believe in. And I've heard secondhand reports of people who had seen this kind of ritual being performed in the cemeteries. They were forced to, like I said, they are part of a number of important revolts and regimes in Haiti. And the thing is, they're basically humans. Sometimes they're not even dead. They're humans who've had part of their souls stolen that are now forced to work for the bokor. But there are also examples of them being dead. They're not generally quite mindless, but they're not exactly sentient either, because their will's enslaved again through magical means. And here's where all this gets interesting. There is multiple, but there's one particularly famous one I'm going to talk about, examples of real people who were, or at least claimed to be, zombies. The thing about being a zombie as well is they are supposed to need to eat meat, but no, they don't eat human flesh. They eat meat just like we do, and usually to get rid of them, you fill the mouth with salt. All the way up to the very elaborate, so that fill them out with salt, sew it shut, and bury them facing the ocean. But here's the thing, and this is where this all gets very creepy. Clairvaux Narcissa Narcisse. He was a Haitian man who died actually the year I graduated high school in 1994. Or he died the second time, I should say, in 1994. See, what had happened was that Narcisse, see if the year that it happened. Narcissa was declared dead in a Haitian hospital by two doctors, one of whom had been trained in the United States. It was then buried. 18 years later, he showed up in his village, convinced a couple of the villagers and his own sister that he was Clever Narcissa. The whole thing confused the heck out of the doctors who'd verified him as dead. And Narcissa's claim further went on that he had been dug up by a Bokor who had been paid by a relative of his to get rid of him. But the Bokor turned him into a zombie, dug him out, dragged him off to a plantation, forced him to work there for the intervening 18 years. And then when the Bokor died, he was able to escape and go home. An ethnobotanist by the name of Wade Davis was intrigued by this story. And Davis went to Haiti to try to figure out what was going on. And he did a whole bunch of research into the subject, and he came up with a hypothesis involving tetrodotoxin. Tetrodotoxin is a neurotoxin. Specifically, it's a neurotoxin that you find in pufferfish, or as the Japanese like to call it, fugu. As you may know, fugu, pufferfish is a delicacy in Japan, but it has to be prepared in a very precise way. If it's not prepared properly, you will die painfully after eating it. Here's the thing about that, though. What Japan figured out earlier on, and it seems Haiti may have figured out as well, is that not everyone who's poisoned by tetrodotoxin dies. The drug can put someone into a catatonic state that is clinically indistinguishable from death. Or at least it was in the 70s. Medical technology is advanced. I don't know for certain what the status is today. It is such a deep catatonic state that the breath and heart rate slows. They can even survive being buried. They for short periods of time. If they're buried for too long, they're going to get brain damage, which may also explain some of the mindlessness. But the person can then be dug up. The theory further goes on that after being dug up, and this actually, he was buried on May 2nd of 1962. But he was giving a paste made from a plant called datura. And datura at certain doses can cause memory loss and is a hallucinogenic drug. After being forced to eat that repeatedly, and along with others at the plantation, it was able to help keep him in the zombie state that was used to work. The Bokor died 2 years after this happened, which then he gradually started to come out of the trance state he had been in due to massive doses of hallucinogenics. I will tell another story, which is third hand at this point, because I can't give you the guy who told me it, because he's since passed away. I'll give you another story that was told to my mentor, Father Joe, by a woman who was from Haiti. But she told him about going to a cemetery in Haiti at night and watching a Bokor with her sisters, against the express wishes of their parents, to see a Bokor dig up and raise a zombie. She even commented to Father that she liked living in the United States where the dead don't walk. Whether you want to argue that the zombie process is the result of drugs or the result of actual black magic and demonic activity. There is Clairvos Narcissa is somebody you can look up. He's got a Wikipedia page. You can find information about this in similar cases. There's certainly enough evidence that something is going on here. Davis's work, and for that matter, the discovery of tetrodotoxin, they have been experimenting, trying to figure out if they could use it for medical purposes, particularly relating to putting somebody under for sedation. There's a whole series of very serious dangers whenever anyone goes under sedation. They're always looking for better and safer drugs to do it with. But and for that matter, if you're interested in this story, I would highly recommend Wade Davis's excellent book, "The Serpent and the Rainbow," which chronicles his investigation into the zombie phenomenon. There's also the movie made by Wes Craven, "The Serpent and the Rainbow," which is loosely inspired by the book. Although also interesting because it involves a number of the extras were actually taking part in voodoo rituals, and the trance states and things like that you see in the movie aren't fake. They're the actual product of these rituals. But yeah, that's the actual origin of the zombie myth. The idea of the Walking Dead, there's what you might call the Hungry Dead, which is the whole vampire thing. But there are other ideas of the Walking Dead, and certainly the idea of enslaved dead seems fairly unique to voodoo and its related religions. But the idea certainly of the dead rising for reasons other than to go eat people or drink their blood isn't unique to Haiti either. You also have Europe has ideas of what they call revenants, which are usually dead bodies that rise up for revenge against the person who killed them or some similar wrong. But that again doesn't have a whole lot to do with zombies. The big inspiration I think for zombie movies is, like I said, vampire folklore, because vampire folklore is a lot closer. They are in actual folklore. They are dead bodies that dig themselves out of the grave and go out and attack people. They are not suave, debonair, Eastern European nobility. In fact, usually they're peasants. That's from the movies. But okay, I think it's a little short, but I think we're probably going to be done for tonight. I think I've reached a fairly natural stopping point. There's certainly plenty more to be said. I highly recommend people do their own research. Voodoo and its related religions really are a fascinating topic, and Hollywood makes a mess of them, as it often does. The website TV Tropes even has a whole page dedicated to Hollywood voodoo, rooting out the mistakes that movies make compared to the actual religious practices. It's not as scary and spooky and sinister as people have made it out to be. But then again, it's hard to make a horror movie out of a relatively benign religion. That's going to do it for tonight, though. I think we will be back next week. I'll figure out a topic for next week sometime between now and then. Thank you all for listening. I have been your host, Kevin Mears, demonologist in the Paranormal Encyclopedia. If you like what I'm doing, if you want to support me, please consider liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. Comments are always welcome, positive or negative. Just realize if you're rude and insulting, I will probably make fun of you. And if you get too vulgar in your language, I will just simply kick you out. And yet, yes, Teresa, I highly recommend you go dig up your research from college and reread it. It's like I said, it's a cool subject. And I mean, as I've said many times on the show, I find religion, and not just my religion, all religion, absolutely fascinating. What people believe and why they believe it, and the way that it's affected history. And this is a religion that's had an important impact on the history of several the entire history of Haiti as a nation has been deeply shaped by voodoo. Um, I'm not saying in horrible ways, in positive ways. It is part of their cultural identity, and for that matter, it's not the only nation like that. There is some evidence, for example, that a certain Caribbean dictator, before he took over this country, wore a red sash, which is a traditional symbol of Santeria, and claimed to be the son or possibly an incarnation of Ogun Badagris, the Santorian god of destruction. He dropped, Fidel Castro, if you haven't guessed yet, dropped a lot of these references when he took over as a communist dictator, because religion and communism generally don't mix. But there is evidence to suggest, and people, I don't know if they're still around, but there were people at one time that remembered him when he was first coming up and first planning to take over, very much identifying himself with the religion and being a practitioner and having even been initiated within it. So again, it has had more role than you think. But again, thank you all for listening. Like, share, comment, subscribe. If you have some money to throw at me, you can go to the patreon.com/demonology. Links in the description. You can also, if you have questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to email me. Email is in the description below. That's going to do it for tonight. Thank you. This is Kevin Mears saying good night, everybody, and God bless.